What gives you hope right now, and what do you think the biggest threat is to America?
I think liberalism is the biggest threat to our culture and our way of life. I think the left causes people to sell themselves out to identity and to all sorts of ideas and idealisms and so forth, that the left encourages them to take these multiculturalism, diversity, inclusion, all these sorts of things, and identify with them and give themselves a self-esteem based on these empty idealisms that have no connection to reality. And so leftism, I think, really retards development as a human development. The more you get stuck in them, the less you grow, the less you develop. They become parts of the personality that are just lazy and don't, where you're not really engaging the world as it. To me, the whole thing in one of the whole things in life, to me the whole challenge is, let me see it the way it really is. Let me know what it really is, whether it flatters me or it probably won't, whether it flatters me or not. I want to know what reality is, what I'm dealing with here. I'm not dealing here with inclusion. I'm not dealing with diversity. I have to have diversity to be at. I'm not dealing with any of those things. I'm dealing with reality, with what's going on within me that's holding me back, or what am I doing right? But I really want to know what's real in the world, rather than as America has tried to sell blacks. I think to save itself, but to sell blacks on this idea, you're a victim. That's your authenticity. The most authentic thing about you as a black person is that you come from a victimized and entitled group. That's the kiss of death. You believe that, you're going nowhere. You're not going to learn anything. You're stopped in your tracks. And you can't do a worse thing to someone than to impose on them that kind of identity, as white Americans often do, as a way of then winning back moral authority for themselves. And it's a selfish thing to do. It's pernicious. The slave master didn't do that. He demanded labor. He may beat you, but he didn't take your soul. He didn't tell you who you were as a human being. But today, liberalism does that. And I can't have you come and speak, Mr. Steele, you can't speak to my class. I'm sorry, I really like what you say, but you can't, because you are, you're telling these people that they're not victims, and I'm sorry. We just can't go there. We can't have that. I'm a true believer. I think we will get there. I think we'll go through these very stupid mistakes, I think blunders. I think we'll learn. There are voices in our society that will point out the mistakes that we're making. I think conservatism is, in a sense, a political point of view that has, by default, sort of been given that role to point out some contradictions in this whole liberal, redemptive sort of culture, that the political correctness and so forth. We're Americans. It can get ugly at any time, but we'll work it out. We'll move past it. I feel very comfortable about that.
You talk about the reality. It's so hard with all the mass manipulation going on and the corruption of institutions, be they education or media or government. It's hard for people to get to the truth. So how divided do you think America really is? And how much is there white supremacy moving around and raising up and becoming a threat?
I think that many white people in America today are upset and tired of being judged unrelentingly as bigots. It's as though white synonymous with bigot, that equals, I mean, they're like one and the same. Nobody likes to live under an accusation. It's no human being likes that. There's gonna be some reaction, and as soon as there's reaction, whites are double bound, because then they say, "Ah, we knew you were racist all along, and now you're just proving it all over again," and blah blah blah. And so whites then feel completely stifled and stop. That's a real frustration. I don't like that. There's going to be blowback. I think whites are wiser now. I don't think they want to go back to the old days of evil, of racism, and all that sort of thing. But we're going to go through a phase where it's what I call race fatigue, where whites are going to be just like, I've had it. I'm not sending my kid to that university anymore. I'm not paying. There's going to be some rebellion. That's part of the process, because we have unfairly judged them. We put them in our culture. They've been relegated to evil, and it's unfairly so. They weren't even born, most of them, when all these things were happening. And then too, I think the good thing is that I'm old enough now to see how societies really do move through phases, and where they're grappling with something and it looks impossible, but then somehow they move. When I was 18 years old, I thought segregation would never end. I said it, I just thought, well, just get used to it, it's never going to end. A few years later, it began to crumble. And so I think that the frustration that is now present in the white community is, first of all, understandable, and second of all, is going to pass.
So, Dr. Steele, I'm kind of my husband's biggest fan, and in that capacity,
I don't know. Maybe I get in there too.
well, I have to say, maybe as his biggest fan, what you wrote about my husband a few years back about him being the freest black man is one of my favorite, if not the favorite things I've ever read about him. So tell people who may not be familiar with it, why do you say Clarence Thomas is the freest black man in America?
The short version is, he is truly an individual before he is anything else. And what is remarkable, one of the many things that's remarkable to me, he had to, and I wrote that in a review of his autobiography, which I thought was a really great book that will be around for a long, long, long time. But you see the things that he had to overcome that would have stopped so many of us, and yet somehow there's just this almost inexplicable grit and will, determination, and yet he's the kind of guy who kind of has a good time while he's doing it. He's not morose and dark about it. He's essentially a happy man. His family life was broken. He didn't have a father available. He didn't have a lot. He didn't have sometimes food to eat. There's sometimes warmth. Yet somehow he found that his grandfather helped him find that inner sense of direction and focus and drive, and he's a self-driven. Clarence Thomas is not the result of a social program, some intervention of some kind where friendly people lifted him up. It came from within him and within his family, and he just amazing the things that he overcame, and finally he is on the Supreme Court of the United States, and he doesn't owe anything to anybody. He doesn't owe allegiance to this group or that group or this element of society or that. He's on the court as an individual with his own mind, and he's making fascinating law that is going to be here for a long time. People are going to study, because there's a unique mind there. really amazing. And so he's my friend, my hero. He's his own man. That's the best thing you can say about someone.
Besides Clarence Thomas, besides Shelby Steele, who are the other courageous black leaders who have bucked the liberal orthodoxy and found their own way despite all the pressures in our culture?
Well, there is, they are called, I guess by default almost, black conservatives. What that actually means in terms of each one is probably a little different. But I think essentially they're people who insist on being an individual. Freedom for them did not mean the right to enter into group politics or identity politics. Freedom for them meant the right to function as a free citizen of the United States of America, to become an individual with an individual voice and make your contribution that way. There are more and more of these people. Everywhere I go, as the years pass, I just see more and more and more and more who are really, and it's so heartening, young people who want to be themselves. They're Americans, and they want to be. They want to use their freedom and become whoever it is that they can become.
Is America more or less race conscious than it should be? And what mistakes have been made to get us to a place that's contrary to Martin Luther King's dream that you so clearly wrote about?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we always get in trouble with race when we don't want to admit the reality that race often covers up. And we use race to cover up reality. And so just as Martin Luther King won freedom and the right to move beyond race, to move past it, we turned right around and began to use race as a device to, we said, to help people, to lift them up, but in a sense it was population control. It now matters, your race all of a sudden matters again. And is going to be the source of some entitlements, some advantages, some disadvantages. So right away, we're all back playing the race game. And we keep it alive. My feeling is anytime it's used, it's a corruption. It is always a corruption. It's not necessary. Certainly in politics and in social affairs, race is we have to evolve past our fascination with it. Again, I think it's always an aspect of laziness, of indulgence. We indulge in race because we don't want to really figure out, for example, black incomes are going down, education levels are going down, and so we'll come up with all kind of racial devices to answer or deal with that problem. When the real problem, of course, is very likely the fact that the black family is in a downward spiral. Just 75% of all children, black children, born out of wedlock. Well, just that statistic. How do you overcome that? How is race going to help you there? What's it going to? Then you get them in school and you say we've got to know what their racial identity is and we've got to teach them. These kids don't have a father. They don't have a father figure. They have a mother who's often too young and immature to really do a good job at that. They have a fractured, inconsistent family life with tenuous, difficult relations with everybody in their world. That's the problem. If you think race is going to solve that, so another generation will come and go, and we'll keep playing. At some point, we will have to drop it because it's just so absolutely ineffectual and irrelevant. That was King's vision, and God bless him, he was right. We have betrayed his vision and wasted another couple generations, and black people have declined more so than during the era of segregation. we have to get beyond race. We just have to do that at some point.
Talk about the fact that there's so many mixed race people that the boxes aren't making sense for the old-fashioned policy choices that used to drive so many of these matters.
Well, that's right. I mean, there is, and many black groups resent mixed race categories because they feel it depletes their numbers and their political advantage. So then you get another identity war over this silly thing. My grandson, who again, as I mentioned earlier, went to school first grade, and you have to declare your race and your primary race, or you cannot go to school. You cannot get an education in America if you don't declare your race. And so my son follows this up in his documentary. But his son is white, is black, is Jewish, is Mexican. I'm the Native American. All of those things. What is he supposed to do?
He's American.
He's an amalgam. And America is that kind of it's a free society, and it's open.
Should be celebrated.
That should be celebrated. It's so free that we've moved beyond race. The thought of encumbering this young kid with, he looks at you like he doesn't know what you're. So what race are you, Jack? He goes, the ham-fistedness of people who design these policies and so forth that are no better than the policies of segregation were. We can't have blacks be busboys in this restaurant because white people would see their hands on the plates. Well, now Jack can't go to school because that's not progress.
So discuss where we went wrong of putting race and ideology together, and how do we correct it? When can we correct it? What could you offer President Trump to do to get us beyond these problems?
Well, I think the problem comes from the fact that we, in the 60s, America, as I talked about, America had undergone a moral fall in the civil rights era and so forth, Vietnam. We realized that we finally acknowledged what the mistakes made in the past, the sins committed in the past, without realizing that the price we paid was a loss of moral authority, among other things. And so there was a question whether or not in the 60s this society was going to survive. There were really riots in the street. I mean, they were across the country. There was real bad faith everywhere, disenchantment everywhere, an idea that America was no longer legitimate. Well, to gain back, scramble back that legitimacy, we picked up the very evil that we had just defeated, race. And we started saying, well, we're going to do this for blacks and we're going to do this for Hispanics. And we start creating a liberalism that grants people all sorts of privileges and opportunities based on their race. Gives them an investment in their race, and makes, for people who are, you're my friend or you're my enemy, depending on whether you're in my group or not, in my race or not. And so we just started all over again, and we're still stuck there. What I think one of the qualities that gave President Trump some political charisma was that he seemed to be indifferent to those pressures, and insisting on us all being citizens and all being Americans, and not catering to groups and playing back one group against another and so forth. He seemed to say, no, same laws for everybody, that's it. That's all we need to worry about. Well, it almost looks a little lightweight, but it's actually kind of profound. That's what we need. And maybe he could say it in different language. I don't know, but it's good enough for me. He makes the point. We have to move beyond race. I'm not going to cater to it. I'm not going to keep rewarding it. And God bless him. That's where the whole country needs to move.
Explain why you say bad faith in America is now part of the Black identity, which is so troubling to some of us. And what are the implications of this spreading and escalating further?
Yes, it is. It is heartbreaking. It's sad. My father was born in 1900 in the Deep South, and made something of his life. Third grade education, that was all. Taught himself to read and write. Believed in America at a time when you would say, to blacks today would say, "What, was he crazy?" No, he was born into a certain level of opportunity, and he seized it, and he believed that's what else could you do? What else were you supposed to do? Well, people in that kind of situation he had good faith in America even when it didn't make any sense. He still was a believer. He needed to have good faith for himself, as well as for the larger society. Well, one of the things that happened in the 60s, I think, is that, again, we had this new idea of America as essentially evil, as essentially bigoted and oppressive and so forth. It had been those things. It was trying to get beyond them, but it owned up to that in the 60s. It's very courageous, but it owned up to that. Well, we cheated. We, instead of saying thank you, we held it against America. And we said, now you don't have the moral authority anymore to tell me what's legitimate and what's not. I have that moral authority. You don't have it anymore. And so we put America at this deficit of moral authority, and we tore up the streets and so forth. And it caused, so that because America was evil, bad faith became a good thing, became a value. It became revolutionary, glamorous. And I hate America, and America is evil, and America is so forth and so on. And it got to the point where it created this idea of anti-Americanism. Bad faith is anti-Americanism, and that's what makes you a good person and a civilized person. You gotta have a little anti-Americanism. If you identify with America as with good faith, you're probably linked to that old evil. You probably want segregation again. You probably want racism again. You probably want all those evils. And so the best path is to have bad faith, mistrust, suspicion, skepticism, doubt. The problem is, of course, that you then start to destroy yourself because you're living on suspicion and doubt and hate. You're not living on anything positive. And I think that's where Black Americans got stuck in the 60s. And we created an identity for our group that is bad faith, blackness. What is blackness? Blackness is complete uniform hatred of America, bad faith in America. That's what it means to be black. Power, black power is bad faith power. And that is just been ruinous to Black America. Now we're worse off than we were in segregation by almost every socioeconomic measure. Education levels, income levels, everything, we're worse off with this idea of bad faith as being our authenticity, our racial authenticity. People can be stupid sometimes. I say that as someone who was participated in a good bit of it in my time. I have to be honest. It was seductive. It was very seductive. Gave me an edge. Somehow I had thought I had an edge in American life. I didn't, but that was the illusion. That was the illusion.
So you have had a path in your life that has been extraordinary in that what you've seen and the different camps and as you've matured and done other things, what are your lessons learned from the path that you've led so far in a general way?
I should be smarter than I am. I've learned that. You know, well, I tried different things, different periods in life. I didn't just sort of, I mean, I gave them a good shot. And learned. I know I'm an individual whether I want to be one or not. I know that God puts us here and He gives us a fate to deal with. He gives us certain abilities to deal with. He expects us to try to find positivity and healthy ways of responding, and oftentimes group membership, group identity is the downfall of the strong individual and the kind of individual that really contributes. That's something I've learned. I'm never going to, I'm not looking for an identity.
So your message to anyone who will really listen, if you're with young people who are open-minded, what do you tell them?
Oh, I tell them, I tell them, number one, take a deep breath and relax. You don't have to live up to some socially prescribed idea of who you are and where you put your place in history. You're just Joe Smith or whomever. Find out what you love in life. Find out what you want to do with your life. That way you will be, ultimately you will make a contribution. But that's what it's really about. What are you good at? What do you care about? What you as an individual, not as a black or a white or a woman or a whatever. You know, there's nothing. What are you gonna? You're gonna be black? You're born black. You're gonna die black. You've already got that one. Who are you? You're free. You're absolutely free. You're free to do and be anything that you wish. You have to know that now, that we can't go an inch further without people knowing you are free. There are no posses coming after you. There are no lynch mobs coming after you. Nobody cares. You're free. People quite willing, and I am impressed and humble thinking about the level of moral progress white Americans have made over the last 60, 70 years. I don't know anywhere else in the world that's ever happened. It's not the same. They're not the same. They changed. They transformed themselves. They don't want racism. They're not out here advocating for racial structuring and putting themselves at the top of a hierarchy and so forth. They know racism is wrong. They don't want to be a part of it. They don't want the stigma of it. We overlook that. We don't give credit where credit is due. I feel quite comfortable in America. I can walk around, I can drive around, go to city after city, meet people who are open and talk to me, and I remember very vividly when that was not possible.